So I especially like competitive games, games that you can play someone one on one, and it's a battle of wills or wits or strategies. Games where the player, with a better understanding of the game's fundamentals and kind of the theory behind the game, can usually come out on top. So I wanted to make a video where I analyze a game that has quickly become one of my favorites, which is Ultimate Tic Tac Toe. Now I've done a little bit of research, and from what I have seen on Google and YouTube, just like the first few results and things like that, there's actually very little about the game theory of Ultimate Tic Tac Toe. A lot of it is sort of a more mathematical approach. That is an awful line. Try to amend that real quick. It's a more mathematical approach, information about like using computers to solve the game, kind of like analyzing how to play, that kind of thing. And that approach is critical to understanding the game, and it's interconnected with all the different other aspects of looking at playing the game. But I personally, as I said, I'm very interested in competitive aspects of things, and I'm very interested in the competitive aspect of this game. So that's kind of what I'll be focusing on today. I did see one video, and it was on the topic of winning strategy, but it seemed to be largely false, since it used a sort of rule format that it seemed people don't typically use. It's not the rules that I learned to play with, and the comments on the video generally kind of denounced it as being any sort of viable winning strategy. So today I'm just going to kind of walk you through my approach to playing Ultimate Tic-Tac-Toe, kind of impart some fundamentals that I consider when I play, and analyze a game that I actually played with a friend not too long ago. So hopefully I can lend some examples of practical application to the theory that I will be talking about. Now, in order to talk about the complicated game of Ultimate Tic-Tac-Toe, I think we need to briefly detail the rules of the game. It doesn't do much good to talk about a game if you don't know how to play. So the board is set up very much like a typical tic-tac-toe board, 3x3 grid or board, whatever you want to call it. I think I referred to it as both, with the exception that within each grid space there exists another 3x3 board. So essentially making the entire playing field, or the entire playing board, a gigantic 9x9 grid of sorts. That's kind of how I think about it, at least. And you'll have to excuse the setup that I'm using here. It's a little bit janky, because I'm just using a whiteboard that isn't affixed to anything, so it moves around, so it might be, off. I know it's off center, but it might be moving around a little bit even as it is off center, because this is a little bit of a different kind of video that I'm doing as to my normal content. So my filming setup is literally my phone on a phone stand on a stack of the thickest books I could find, including but not limited to The War of the Worlds and other science fiction classics. Sherlock Holmes, Agatha Christie, all sorts of books that are helping us film today. So thank you, Agatha Christie, I guess. Now, where was I? So you have this big 9x9 grid, sort of the entire thing being the global board, and then composed of these 9 separate local boards within that. So the actions that the players take is essentially the same as normal tic-tac-toe. You take alternate turns placing X's and O's on the board, starting with player 1. And player 1 can go wherever they want on the board. So just to demonstrate, let's say player 1 is X and they go here. I'm not sure if player 1 is supposed to be X or O. I don't know if it matters. It might be one of those like checkers situations where they say like fire before smoke, or like smoke before fire, and then fire before smoke, or wait, how does that go? I don't know. Whoever goes first in checkers. So let's say player 1 goes there. So the catch with Ultimate Tic-Tac-Toe is that the previous player's move redirects their opponent's following move to the location on the global board corresponding to where they played on the local board. Now, I just read that off of a script that I'm using for this video, so let me explain what that means, because I'm a visual learner, and that was a lot of words. So essentially, because player 1 played there, and again, they could have played on any one of the 81, grid spaces on this entire board, 81 possible first moves, but they played there. And because they played there, they redirect player 2's first move to this specific local board right here. Because you see, it corresponds with the placement on this local board on the global board. Does that make sense? Like if you imagine this local board where player 1 played their first move as being the entire board, that mark corresponds to that board. So that is the catch of the game. So player 2 would have to play anywhere on this board, let's say. They go there, so then player 1 has to play up here, play here again, and play just continues in this manner, just exactly like this. And then let's say, so eventually it might get to a point like this, where one player has an opportunity to win a local board, and this happens just like normal tic-tac-toe, 3 in a row, just on a local board. And when that happens, you mark over the entire local board with their mark or their symbol, their letter, maybe you should say. And then this board contributes to a position on the global board. And the way that you win the game, the objective of the game is to get 3 in a row on the global board. So it's, the objective is similar to normal tic-tac-toe. Anybody who's played normal tic-tac-toe should be very, very familiar with this idea. But obviously achieved in a slightly different way. So the first person to get 3 in a row on the global board wins. And then the last key thing that you should know is that, so let's say player 2 just completed their move by winning this local board. Even though they played their last mark right here, player 1 is not limited to just this local board. They can go wherever they'd like because player 2 won the local board. So on the turn immediately following a local board win, the player can move wherever they want. So maybe they go right there, win that one. So then player 2 can play again, and let's say they go right here, and this leads into sort of the other aspect of this idea. If you redirect towards a 1 local board, you can also follow by going anywhere that you want. So just because player 2 played there and redirects X towards, or player 1 towards this spot where they can't really play because player 2's already won it, it doesn't mean that player 1 misses their turn or anything. They just get to choose anywhere at all that they'd like to go. So let's say they go there, and then again player 2 would get to go wherever, so on and so forth. You get the basic idea. And already you can kind of see how this is far more complicated than just normal tic-tac-toe. There's a lot more viable options. As I said, in a normal tic-tac-toe game, there are only 9 possible starting options that player 1 has, and only a few of them are really smart. I mean, tic-tac-toe is a very easy game to solve if you are familiar with sort of like the gimmicks that you can use. Player 1 can have a guaranteed win or draw. Essentially, player 1 should never lose, ever. And I'm not going to waste time drawing that out and detailing it, but you can easily look it up, like how to win at tic-tac-toe. So tic-tac-toe, not that complicated. Once you know what you're doing, it's solved. It's a solved game. But ultimate tic-tac-toe, far more complicated. 81 possible first moves, and then following that, very many more moves are possible. So more viable options, more movement trees. I think lend the game to a higher skill ceiling than regular tic-tac-toe. So I'll go ahead, recreate this board again. I'm sorry that they're not straight. My lines are not straight whatsoever. I could have done like a printout, but I figured dry erase board is A, more fun. You can't really see my hand. A, more fun, and B, I don't know, I just had a dry erase board. I want to use it. So, already a far more complex game than normal tic-tac-toe, but complexity without understanding just yields confusion, right? If something is complex but you don't understand how to get to the meaning within the complexity, it's just confusing. So there exists a need for understanding the objectives of the game and how to best achieve them in order for one to be competent at this game. So at this point, I'm going to go over some of the concepts and fundamentals that I keep in mind when I'm playing my games. And I want to take this opportunity to admit that I am in no way an expert at this game, nor do I consider myself such. These are just kind of principles that I try to adhere to, try to keep in mind, and I found that they serve me fairly well in my goal to win. Uh, I've had positive results with these sort of fundamentals, so I'd like to share them. But that said, if you have any ideas or insights into my game, if you see me do something stupid that I'm not realizing is stupid and you want to call it out as being stupid, feel free to, leave a comment, reach out. Part of the reaction that I kind of want to facilitate with this is just to introduce more people to the game and kind of start a conversation about, strategies and things like that. Because things like this really do intrigue me, and I really do get kind of passionate, very strangely, about, children's games that have potential, competitive possibilities. So I'm very eager to hear the opinions and strategies of other people. And it's quite possible that in theorizing myself, I haven't really talked with anybody else in theorizing about this game, so it's quite possible that my perspective has just omitted or looked over some key ideas. So again, if you have any insight, start a conversation, because I am, as much for my sake as for anybody else's, I'm very, very hungry for information. So rather than talk in depth before the whole analysis thing, rather than talk about the fundamentals that I want to get into, I think it's more engaging and efficient to just jump into the analysis of the game that my friend and I played, and then kind of explain the fundamentals as they become applicable. So, here we go. I started the game with my friends, so I went first, which maybe is rude. I don't know. Maybe I should have asked them if they wanted to go first, but, it is what it is. And my first move was right here. I decided to play O's. And already, just with this first move, completely disregarding what my opponent does on their turn, you can kind of gain an insight into one of the fundamentals that I want to talk about. And that is control the center of the board. Something that Ultimate Tic-Tac-Toe shares with Tic-Tac-Toe is that the center is the most versatile space on the board. No matter what other local boards you end up winning, they're going to have some kind of contact with the center of the global board, this center local board, meaning that this board offers you the most possible opportunities for creating a winning position on the entire global board. Controlling the center, whoop, there goes my pen, marker. Controlling the center offers you both offensive opportunities, because again, it links with any other board, and it also gives you a strong defensive position, because you block your opponent from having that same kind of position. So the center is very, very valuable. Now, I played right there, so my opponent has to play in this local board. They played right there. I played right there. Having to scroll down here. I have a list of pictures so I can see sort of the moves in sequence. So forgive me if I take a moment in between writing down these moves right there. So I played right there. They played right there. So I played right there. And let's see what happened next. They played in the center of that local board. And then I played right here. And by now, you may have noticed a bit of a pattern in how I'm sort of placing my marks. It's been very intentional. It is very intentional how I've been placing my marks. And it kind of brings me, I'm going to this cap is like wobbling a lot, so I'm just going to set it right there because I don't want to deal with it. Very intentional, and it kind of brings me to the next idea that I want to share, which is that of developing your presence in advantageous positions. You should always be aware of and visualize the global board, the entire board. Don't forget, I keep dropping my pen. I'm just gonna, you can stay there for a minute while I gesture. So you don't want to forget that ultimately no pun intended, the game is won on the global board. You could win twice as many local boards as your opponent and still lose the entire game. So in this particular game, I'm looking at where my presence has been established. I have a relatively strong presence in the center, considering that we're only a few turns in. And then my presence has also been established in these other local boards, those three. So, and one of the more interesting facets of this idea, I think, is that you have more agency over your opponent's moves than you do your own, and vice versa, of course. So in a sense, the idea is not so much about developing yourself in positions that suit you well, but rather forcing your opponent to develop themselves in poor position. So you can kind of see how I implemented this idea by containing my opponent primarily to these two local boards. And note, even if they were to win both of these boards, it doesn't create too much of a threat for my objective because I have the center, and these two local boards that I've decided to contain them to don't really engage with each other in a significant way. Whereas if I were to win, really any of the boards that I have my presence in, it would, create kind of the threat of getting 3 in a row. But these two don't really have that threat, so it's not quite as pressing. So the game continues. I'll have to remember. Let's see, where did I think I went there last. That's right. So I don't quite want to give them a win on either of those local boards quite yet. So I redirect them to another local board. They move there. I go right there. They play there. To which I respond right there. And they play right there. And then, let's see. I have to scroll down on my list of pictures here. It's annoying because there's a gap in between pages of the document, so you can't always, just go straight in the line. They played there. They played there. I do want to take a moment and actually just kind of bring something up. Something that you may also have noticed is that a lot of the times, or rather, once I force my opponent to develop in these two squares, or these two boards, I'm kind of letting them branch out a little bit. And then I'm also doing something like this play right here. I went right there, and I forced my opponent to develop further in this board. And that's because I don't want them to do to me what I'm trying to do to them in forcing them to develop to disadvantageous positions. So by kind of marking the board like that and forcing them to play in the same local board that they just sent you to, it sort of equalizes the playing field a little bit in a sense. And it forces them to allow you to place your next mark somewhere that isn't, quite so removed. So that's also how my opponent could have prevented me from letting them develop here. The moment that I played this move, and then they played, I think I played that move, and then they played there, then I played right there. They could have just played up here in that corner and forced me to allow them to go to some other local board. So that can also that's kind of a counterplay to the strategy. And of course, I don't know if one strategy is better than the other. This is just generally how I play. I think it's a little more on the aggressive side. I think I tend to play more aggressive in trying to force my opponent into these bad situations. But again, that's just kind of how I go about playing the game. So my last move was right there. So my opponent played right there, and I played right here. And my opponent played up there, where did I go? I went right here. My opponent plays, I have to scroll down on the page. Opponent plays right there. And I played right there, to which they play right there. And I play right there. So at this point, I want to point out two things. The first is that, as you may have noticed, we have both had a few opportunities to win local boards. My opponent could have won that board. I think I had an opportunity to win this board, but we have chosen not to. And the reason for this is because, and I can't give any insight into my opponent's mind. I didn't actually talk with them about this game or anything like that. But at least from my perspective, the reason we're declining these wins is because, again, winning the local boards often gives the opponent an advantage, since it frees them from having to follow with a mark in one specific local board. It frees them to go to any free grid space. And the other thing to note is that many of the local boards that were very clearly defined as being controlled by one player or the other are now very much contested. But in most cases, one player is going to be more dominant, or in a more, you could call it a more winning position within the local board. So, for example, in this local board, my opponent has a slightly more winning position than I, because it will take more work and calculation on my part to win this board than it will take them. Now, conversely, with something like, let's say with this board, well, hold on. Let's take a look here. Yeah, I mean, something with, like this board, you could maybe say that we're about equal. But if this board ends up being more useful, actually, I'll tell you what, I'm looking ahead at my opponent's next move. My opponent's next move is right there. So prior to that move, I'd say I was definitely winning that board. After that move, you could say it's roughly equal. Both of us, if we are redirected to that local board, we could both win it. But if that board ends up being more useful, unconquered, for my opponent's strategic purposes, let's say they want to redirect me back to the center or to one of these two, then you could say that I'm actually winning, because it's far easier for me just to win that board rather than it is for my opponent to keep it unwon, or free or open, so that they can redirect me to these other locations. So sort of a thing to keep in mind. And I find that it's most useful from a strategic standpoint to view these winning local boards as having sort of already been won, just for the sake of visualizing the global board. I think it's useful because you can analyze sort of your own weaknesses, like the weaknesses in your own position, and then also identifying where to add more defensive pressure to your opponent. So in fact, this concept actually is going to be very, very relevant in just a turn or two. So my opponent moved right there, and I responded by winning this local board. So that is my local board. So let me make sure there's not my opponent. Okay, yes. So I won that local board. My opponent chooses to win this local board. So you see how it kind of became relevant in that that used to be a board that I was winning. I had a winning position in that board, but my opponent probably recognized that and realized that they needed to play a little bit more offensive around that board. And what do you know? They ended up actually winning it for themselves. So at this point of the game, both my opponent and I have won at least one local board, and we hold winning positions on at least one other local board. So at this point, typically, I consider the game as having transitioned properly from the early game to the mid game or the end game. And the main shift that occurs here, besides the name change, is the idea that you no longer necessarily have to play entirely to place your opponent in a disadvantageous position, but rather now you should be looking to prevent them from furthering what advantages they already have begun to develop, and also forcing them to play in such a way as to give you an advantage. Something that wasn't really easy to do in the early game due to how many spaces and how many options your opponent would have. But now that some of these spaces have become a little bit more congested, a little bit more narrow, you can really start using them to your advantage in sort of redirecting you to an advantageous position. And then if we return just for a moment to the point I made a second ago concerning winning positions within local boards, it was actually at this point in the game I realized what the most important local board in the game was. And I'll give you a second to look for it and see if you can find what it is. See if you're on the same wavelength as I am. And you can pause the video, but I'll give you a moment. So I identified this board right here, this local board right here, the upper right local board, as being the most crucial to me. So you can see that my opponent actually has a pretty good command of this entire side of the board. And this one is actually the one that I have the least influence in. But despite that, despite the fact that it's going to be sort of the most difficult for me to win back, it is the most important, as it gives me a far more winning position on the global board, on the board overall. And it destroys what at this point is my opponent's only chance to win the game, right? Because if you look at where my opponent is developed, I said that they were very strong on the right side, but that's pretty much the only place where they're strong, right? If they want to, do anything with, say, this board that they've developed or this board that they've barely developed, right? They're either going to have to develop this board a great deal more, and then even if they do that, they have to, feasibly they'd have to win this board as well, which would be a great deal of work, in theory, because I already have a big advantage there. Or they would have to win back the center from me if they wanted to utilize this board that they're essentially winning, or that they've essentially won. They'd have to win the center from me, which, as I said before, one of my main goals is to control the center. And I'm being very cautious and I'm being very careful so as not to relinquish control of this center board, because it's very important. So this board right here, very important for me, because it blocks my opponent from getting 3 in a row here, and it also creates the opportunity up here for me to get 3 in a row. And you could also argue maybe that because it is the most open, and this one is a little bit more congested, that this one is actually more valuable because it gives me more opportunities to redirect my opponent to more local boards. So that could perhaps be a lens that you look at it through. All right, but continuing with the game, forget the cap. So my opponent won there. I placed right there. And my opponent played, let's see, do I have this correct? Yes, I do. Played right there. I played right there. My opponent plays right there. I play right here. My opponent plays there, sending me back to the center, which I do like, but I'm also very wary of, because if I give my opponent a free play, they could just take this board from me very quickly, just win it, and then it would be very, very easy for them to win that board as well, winning the game. So I'm very, very cautious, and I do want to point out also that it may seem like I'm losing this game. It may seem like I'm in a losing position. My opponent is simply 2 free moves away, or 2, bad redirects away from winning the game. Whereas I, sort of the main thing that I had going for me, which was perhaps this diagonal 3 in a row, got ruined by them playing there. So it may seem that I'm in a very bad situation, but I honestly, I don't think so. I don't think that's the case, because even if, well, I won't say even if I lose that spot, I probably lose the game. But I have a fighting chance of winning back that spot, and if I win back that spot, my opponent, has a very, very low chance of win. Probably if I win, or if I win that spot, my opponent's best chance of not losing is just to draw. And you can draw in this game, of course, just like normal tic-tac-toe, if there's no 3 in a rows by the end of the game. So, I don't necessarily see this as a losing position for myself. I just see it as a very important position for myself. And I'm sort of teetering back and forth. It's a very volatile position. Perhaps that's the best way to say it. So, but I wouldn't conflate this with the idea that it is a bad position, because I really don't think it is that bad. So, I played. Let me see. Oh, I lost track of where I was. Oh dear. Let's see. So that move, play, and then right there, played there, and I played. Where did I play? I played right there. My opponent. Okay, I'm back on track now. So my opponent played right there. I played right here. So here, I want to bring something up, because that was actually a very important move, because you see, this is me starting to develop my presence in the most important local board for me. So I think that right here, my opponent simply should have claimed this board, should have just won this board, so that it would delay my development of this board. The way that they went about it, and I'll even show you the next move. So I played right there, my opponent plays right here, and then they completed, and then I follow by continuing to develop in this important local board. If they had just won that the turn earlier, I wouldn't have been able to put that right there. So it would have very much delayed my ability to develop in that local board, which at that point, that is the most valuable board to me right now. And at this stage of the game, it's become one of my main objectives. I have a few main objectives that I'm keeping in mind right now. One is to win that local board, because it's very important. 2, I really want to maintain control of my center. Obviously, I'm still very much winning. I have a lot of, I could play right there for 3 in a row, play there for 3 in a row. So it's not super, super dangerous, and as far as me losing control of it, but I still want to make sure that I have it, because it's going to be very important for me in preventing my opponent from winning at the very least. So yeah, those are kind of like my main 2 objectives at this point in the game. So I played right there, and so yes. In fact, when my opponent delayed winning that move, it guaranteed me a win on that board, because you see, they played right here trying to stall it. I played right there, sending them right back here, so they had to win. I get my free play. I choose to play right here, and then I redirect my opponent right here, and there's not a single space on this board that they can play where they don't win the board. So I essentially guarantee myself the ability to win that local board, which would not have been guaranteed had my opponent not tried to stall. So this really is sort of a good segue into mentioning the importance of looking at the different move trees, right? Considering all your options, and then considering your opponent's options off of all those options. Sort of similar to chess, trying to think multiple moves ahead, see which move creates the best outcome in the long run for you. And really, there's no secret to that. I don't really have a secret for doing that. It's just a matter of sort of, looking for a line, playing maybe 2 or 3 moves ahead, and then, or whatever you're capable of. For me, it's usually 2 or 3 moves. And then, just sort of making a mental note of which one is the best, and then, going about it. I really don't have any tip or trick for that one, but Essentially, it's something you should always be trying to do, and I think it's one of the more intuitive things, you know, one of the more intuitive ideas that comes with this game is trying to look ahead and plan ahead of your moves. So I play right there, essentially guaranteeing me that board. And it was at this stage of the game. I don't think I played this game a few days ago, so I don't recall exactly every thought that was passing through my head. But I believe it was at this point in the game that I felt confident that my opponent was not going to win. I wasn't sure. I knew there was the slight possibility of a draw, but I felt fairly confident that I was going to win. So I somewhat rudely messaged to my friends the words "good game" along with my move. It was just felt a little cocky. So perhaps that's pride having its way. But so my opponent wins there. I choose to win there. My opponent has a free play, and this is an interesting point, right? Because this is perhaps the most important move at this stage of the game, and my opponent chooses to go there. So the final thing that I want to the final point that I want to explore is the importance of these conquered local boards in one's endgame strategy. So, had my opponent used their freedom of playing in any local board to their advantage, perhaps this game could have had a different conclusion. I'll be honest, I haven't run through every single possibility, looked through every single tree. I don't know, but I do think that they probably could have forced some kind of a draw, most likely. It would have had to been very crafty, because they'd have to, I don't think winning the center is very viable at this point, but they'd have to certainly win that space from me, and they'd have to win that space from me, and then perhaps win that space, and maybe they could win, or maybe I would win that space back. Either way, there's a lot of different ways that this game probably could have gone, but going there was, obviously hindsight being 2020, probably one of the worst moves for them to have picked, since it actually guarantees me a victory in 3 turns or less. So essentially, my goal at this point is to force them to give me a free play by redirecting me to a conquered local board, right? I want to force them to send my next move to one of these boards so that I get a free play, because I only need 1 free play in order to win the game. So I'm actually thirsty, so I'm going to get a real quick drink of water. Again, feel free to pause the video. I challenge you to look and see if you can find the combination that I found to guarantee me victory in 3 moves or less. Again, my opponent moved right there, so I'm forced to play in here, and there is a way for me to guarantee victory in 3 moves or less. So go ahead, take a look for that for a moment. So, by visualizing the trees, the movement trees that spawn from this single move, I was able to find this way to guarantee me a victory. My opponent plays right there. I choose to play right here. I redirect my opponent to this location. And that move essentially is really the one that guarantees me a victory, but is that what I did? Hold on. I'm looking at my notes, and I'm realizing perhaps that's not what I did. Oh, no, it is what I did. It is what I did. Okay. So I play there, and this really is the move that guarantees me. My opponent can either award me the victory or hope I mess up. But so essentially, my opponent cannot play there because they give me a free spot. They can't redirect me there because that's the local board I need to play on to win. So that's the same as awarding me a free spot, essentially. They can't play there because same deal. So they choose to play here. Well, that's fine. So I have to play here again. Well, I don't want to play here because then my opponent can block me. here, here, here all award my opponent a free play, which I don't want to deal with. That one does as well. The center, I'm still trying to control the center. And besides, it's not even a matter of sending my opponent to a bad spot anymore. It's just it's just finding the move that I need to do to force my opponent to give me the win. And that move is right there. So now we are already in a very bad position for my opponent. If they go right here, they both win that board and also redirect me there. Either, no matter how you want to look at that, so I get the free play, I can win. Same with here, here. So my opponent's really only viable option for not immediately losing the game is to go right here to the center. And once they go to the center, all I have to do is play right there. And in doing that, my opponent is redirected to this local board. They either send me to a free or a 1 board, giving me a free play anywhere that I would like, or they send me to the very local board that I need to play on to win. So they choose to preserve some dignity, I suppose, and they just win that board. But of course, I am able to play right there, winning myself the game. So, there you have it. That is the game. So, if I were to sort of recap the different things that I talked about as precisely as possible, I would say that you can kind of think about the game as being in 2 stages. The first is the early game, and in the early game you want to control the center, you want to develop your presence in advantageous locations, and a lot of the times that just ends up meaning that you want to force your opponent to develop in disadvantageous positions. Just because, you can assume by how many spaces are free overall on the local boards, you're going to have some marks a little bit here, a little bit there. It's going to be spread out, but you want to try to concentrate yourself in those good positions. And then again, force your opponent into unideal situations. And then once you get to a point where, both players, or maybe even one player, it's kind of an abstract line border between early game and mid game and end game. But I'd say usually once somebody has created the threat of winning a local board or multiple local boards, that's when you kind of transition into a more mid-game, end-game mindset. So this is where you want to make sure that you're paying extra close attention to those move trees, seeing, well, if I go here, then my opponent has to go here, 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 which redirects me to here or here, trying to figure out which combination of moves is going to work out best for you. You want to make use of these local boards that have already been won to force your opponent to make plays, or have them force you to make free plays, that kind of thing. And then also contesting local squares that you're weak in, that are critical to your game. Making sure that if, as in the case of this local board, if your opponent is winning it, making sure that you contest it if it is important to your game plan, to your objective. And then also the same sort of fundamental or idea from early game that was developing your presence in advantageous locations. Now you can sort of do that and have a little bit more agency over where you develop, because you're able to force your opponent to allow you to develop in those locations. So it's sort of the fundamental itself sort of develops into a different way of achieving the same thing. So there you have it. Hopefully this video could be interesting or insightful in some way. If you weren't already aware of the existence of this complex variation of a simple game, hopefully you are as intrigued as I was when I first learned of it. And as I said, a large reason as to why I chose to make this video was because I'm truly fascinated by this game. And I want to start more of a dialogue about sort of the winning strategy and the game theory behind it. So I encourage you, if you have theorized about this game as much as I have, to let me know what you think. Sort of let me into your strategies and your ideas, uh, and let me know if there's something that I didn't consider. And even if you're not super into theorizing or anything like that, just challenge a friend. Say, hey, play me an ultimate tic tac toe. Put like $5 on it, and hopefully using the concepts in this video, make an easy $5. So thank you very much for watching. I appreciate you. My throat is getting very gravelly, so until next time, goodbye.